Hey guys, how's it going? It is Morgan coming to you today from YourMaxCo. Today we are going to be talking about fringing, okay? So I know I have a video that I previously put up that was kind of talking about or showing how to cut through like 3 layers of fringe. But one thing that I see in a ton of leather groups that I'm in on Facebook is people talking about fringe and what kind of leather they should get for fringing. So I am coming on to give my own personal opinion, my take on it, and of course show you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. So obviously the most glaring question that I just said is, what kind of leather is good for fringing? Well, in a very short answer, almost any leather is good for fringing. There are a few exceptions to that, so I will preface this video with saying that 9 times out of 10, almost 10 times out of 10, do not work with a thick vegetable tan leather, tooling leather, anything like that. So most of what I use is some sort of garment, upholstery, lots of oil tans, and many different things like that. But no hand tooling or anything like that. So I'm gonna kind of leave that as the exception of the almost any leather works, because I don't typically use tooling leather. So I have a couple of examples, and then I'm gonna kind of explain fringing, which I think will help throughout the process, because I've talked to several people who do leather work as well who kind of have an issue. So let's say that you want to make a bag and you want to have fringe on that bag. Of course, there are several different ways that you can inlay the fringe into your bag, and that is either hanging straight down vertically, so off of the front of the bag, maybe across a rounded bottom, or again, coming out of the sides, which then would mean that the leather's coming out of the sides and then dropping down to hang. So of course, I feel like that is the most popular way, is for it to come out of a side seam in some way, or even out of a seam in the front, you know, maybe for some strips that are going down the front of the bag and there's a lot of fringe. And so a lot of what I see is being able to get that gravitational pull to keep that leather, obviously, coming out and draping down like it should. So I'm gonna go over a couple of different leathers and some different examples of what I do, and then hopefully the tips and tricks that I can give you when fringing is gonna help you be able to kind of expand your mind a little bit on what kind of leathers you can use, all right, specifically for this. Speaking of, I think I have leather in my eyeball right now, so sorry about that, guys. But of course, I'm gonna start with the basic, one of the most popular, which I think is lambskin. Lambskin typically is a nice thin leather, somewhere between 1 to 2 ounces. So here's one of the bags that I made, all right? It's just kind of, I call it a banana bag. That's what I call it, this style of bag that I make. But I'm gonna lay it out here so that you can see, okay, all the fringe. Now this is what I was talking about, where I was saying fringe across the front of the bag, and of course it's hanging vertical. So, you know, this is a really good way to see that the fringe is gonna have movement, that it's gonna move the way we want. You can tell that it's a really soft fringe, so it kind of has that boho feel. I've stitched it across the very top at the zipper. And then I also have a second layer hidden under here. So I'm gonna move the top layer so now you can see the second layer, okay, stitched down. So one thing that I'll say is fringing your leather, something like this is kind of my tip number 1, which is gonna lead me to the next thing. One of the things to remember is how close to the top of your leather that you're going to fringe up, all right? So I left roughly a 1/2 inch between the edge of the leather and where my fringe stops, okay? So where I've stopped my cut mark for that fringe, about a 1/2 inch. That gives me plenty of room to get in here to tape this layer down, to stitch it down, but also the fringe itself is going vertically. It's not like it's coming out of the bag sideways, which again would still work, but it's vertical. So I don't have to take it as close to the top as I would doing something else, which is what I'm gonna show you next. All right, so when doing bags and thinking of fringe, you can use lots of different, you can use lots of different leathers, okay? So the biggest thing I use lambskins, goat skins, sometimes deer and elk if I'm gonna kind of splurge and spend the money on something like that. Tons of different variations of cowhides and different finishes for cowhides. So the next one I'm going to show you is a cowhide as well. So this is another one of my bags. It's just a simple round bag. I have it coming out of a rounded bottom here. So this is where we're getting into a little bit of that gravity, because you can tell these hang straight down from the middle, but these are coming out of the side just a little bit, okay? So the biggest thing and the biggest tip that I'm gonna give is once we start getting into these, any type of seams where the fringe is coming out of a side like this and gravity needs to pull it down, tip that I'm giving you right now, and I want you to remember, almost, my little asterisk, regardless of the leather you use, you need to cut that fringe high enough so that way when you stitch it into the seam, it looks like that's two different pieces. All of these look like they're individual little pieces of fringe coming out of there, because what that does is with that split going 1/4 inch from the top, now when I inlay that fringe into the bag and I stitch this over, there is nothing, this is not attached to any, I mean, it's attached, but once it's in the seam and stitched in, you know, once it comes out, it can let gravity for this individual piece take hold and carry it downwards, okay? So another example I'm gonna show you is this piece right here is probably a 6 ounce or so, maybe even a little bit thicker, 7 ounce oil tan that I got. So it's a pretty heavy duty oil tan, okay? So I wanna show you what I'm talking about whenever it comes to fringing. So this, you can see right here, I have so many ways that I could go with this, okay? But when you want to fringe something as thick as an oil tan, one thing that you have to remember is that your width of your fringe makes 100% difference, and also how far up you decide to fringe and get it close to the top, okay? So typically I would not use something this thick to do fringe off of a bag unless it was hanging vertically. So unless it was hanging just like this and somehow being stitched down, because then you can see with how thin that I have cut these, which is probably around 1/8 of an inch, okay? With how thin I've cut these, it does keep pretty good flow, pretty good movement to it. And this is a very small piece comparative, okay, to what I would do on a bag. But it keeps really good flow. Coming out of the side, it's not gonna work unless my piece was much longer. If I had a 12-inch piece that I was fringing, I could put this in the side of a bag, because this is gonna be heavy enough leather that it is going to use gravity to keep it down. So this is the whole point in the video, is what leather can you use? You can use just about anything if you know how to cut it and you know how to sew it in and manipulate it so that gravity, which is what we want when we have fringe, we want gravity to keep that fringe down and not stick straight out. So if you know how to cut, you know how to inlay it, and you know how wide or how thin you should make your fringe, you can use just about anything, okay? So the biggest thing is, if you're gonna use a thicker leather, even if it's not an oil tan, if you're gonna use a thicker leather, make your fringe thinner, okay? So 1/8 of an inch, maybe 1/4 inch, but that still can be a little too wide sometimes. Make it thinner and then go as close to the top as you can without actually cutting through it. Because once you stitch that in, all right, it's going to allow this, again, if it was a longer piece, for gravity to work this down, and especially over time, it's gonna allow it to be able to carry the softness that you want it to carry. So I'm gonna give you another bag example. So the way this particular leather was finished, all right, this is one of my bucket bags. This bag right now has nothing inside of it, okay? So I hope you can see how structured, I'm gonna rest it on my hand, how structured this leather is by itself. It's sitting upright on my hand, okay? It's got some nice structure to it, and honestly, it's a thin leather. This leather is probably 2 ounces in thickness, okay? It is not a very thick leather, but the finish on it, the finish on the face here that you see all that beautiful glitter, is what is obviously caused this leather to have some structure to it. All right, so this, you can see how wonderful the fringe, and again, it's not very long fringe. It's 5-inch fringe coming out of this side. It's not very long fringe, but you can see how gorgeous this fringe is laying out of the side of the bag, because what I did is I cut the fringe to 1/4 inch width, all right? And I cut the fringe really close to the top as I fringed it, so that when I stitched it right into the side, I'm gonna flip this around. So when I stitched it right into the side, the cut looks like it's going up into the seam, okay? So that has allowed, over the last couple of weeks or months, however long, it has allowed gravity to work this fringe down. And now you can see, it didn't take long. Honestly, it took about 2 or 3 days of just like hanging up where I hang up extra bags for this leather and for gravity to work, for it to just pull this fringe down. So I wanted to show this to you guys and show you that it definitely is possible to use a multitude of different types of leather to fringe without feeling like you have to only get lambskin or only get elk or only get deer or something like that, that naturally is a very pliable leather. You can use so many different types of leather. I hope this was helpful and informational, okay? So the gist of all of this and the examples that I just gave was, using many different types of leather is okay as long as you understand the fluidity of your leather, how wide you need to cut your fringe, and how far up you need to go. And I also want to point out, like this one right here was another one where I cut pretty decent size width on my fringe. I didn't have to cut this one really thin. I didn't have to cut the purple banana bag really thin, because I knew the moment I started cutting this was already going to be a very fluid fringe. But my purple one here, as you can see, I had to cut much thinner, half the width of that one, and a little bit closer to the top edge of the leather, so that way gravity can take effect and do this. So I hope this was helpful. I say don't be afraid to try many different types of leather for fringing, because I think you'll surprise yourself, especially if you just pay attention to how it is going to lay on the particular type of design that you're going to do. And for those of you who have made it this far into watching, I use just a ruler and my rotary cutter, you know, because I'm looking at this pink here. My ruler and my rotary cutter is what I use to fringe everything. So I have one of these 3 by 18 inch rulers. I've got a couple of them. I know you can pick them up, you know, at Joann's or Hobby Lobby or, you know, pretty much anywhere. But Amazon also has one, I think for like $8, which isn't too terribly bad in my opinion, because you're going to pay that, or even 15 or 16 bucks if you go to Joann's for one. But I use these, and then what I love about these is, you know, my ruler, or this particular ruler, has the 1/4 inch grid lines on it all the way across this 3 inches. So this does help, especially if you're someone like me. I'm going to move this down for a minute. I work on a huge table, so I have a cutting mat here that is about 33 by 56 or 57 inches long. So, you know, that in and of itself is a big grid. And then using my gridded ruler can really help, especially if you're starting out and you don't want to eyeball it, getting nice, straight, clean fringe cut lines every single time. So if you guys have any questions about fringing, you can drop it in the comments below and I will get back to everyone. Definitely hit the like and subscribe button. I'm going to be posting more things about leatherworking, more tips, tricks, maybe even walking you through how I make some of my bags in some standard styles and things like that. So thank you guys for watching. I hope everyone has had an excellent holiday season, and we will catch you next time. Bye.